Good morning, everybody. Welcome to the #Drum Whiskey Room for a special Friday morning live stream with a very special guest. This is featuring Alex Conyngham from Slane, co-founder of Slane Irish Whiskey. Good morning. Well, it's kind of late afternoon for you in Ireland, but thanks for joining the show.
No, delighted. Yeah, Friday afternoon here, so we're just getting warmed up for the weekend.
Yes, everyone getting warmed up. I'm getting warmed up, like I said, with an Irish coffee here.
Lovely.
I also have my bottle of Slane that we'll be tasting and trying through, which has
Awesome.
a very unique type of finishing process on this Irish whiskey, which I think definitely gives it a little bit more depth, especially for an 80 proof Irish whiskey. But for those of you for those of us out there that don't know you, why don't you tell us a little bit about, who Alex Conyngham is?
Yeah, sure. So I started the Slane Whiskey project with my dad, Henry, and I'm right now sitting in my office in Slane Distillery, which is on our family property. My family's been here in Slane. Slane's a village. We're about 30 miles north of Dublin in the Boyne Valley. Historically would have been a haven for distilling back in the previous golden era of Irish whiskey in the 19th century. And our family home, Slane Castle, is just a couple of hundred yards away. So I grew up here and had, maybe a slightly colourful upbringing, running around a castle. But it's a lot of bedroom hopping, But and hide and seek was good as well. But a lot of challenges trying to keep a place like that up and running. And my dad took over from my granddad in his 20s and had to figure out how to keep the show on the road. So we've actually been in the music business for 40 years next year, doing big outdoor rock concerts on the property, and that's kind of what put Slane on the map. We were lucky enough to have Metallica there last June, and everyone from the Stones, Bowie, U2, lots of others have played there, and the music business kind of bounced us into the whiskey business because the secret to surviving in a place like here is diversification. And we're also a farming family, so we grow barley right here around the distillery, and that was going into cattle feed, and we said, why the hell are we giving it to the cattle? Wouldn't it be a lot more fun to turn it into whiskey? And that's sort of how we ended up where we are.
Well, that's pretty amazing. So you basically grew up around or in the castle with your dad growing up. Tell me a little bit more about the family lineage leading up to Slane Castle, and like you said, you guys are known for some pretty epic concerts as well. Was the concert part of it that wanted to jump you into Irish whiskey, or was it something else, or was it a combination of things?
Yeah, I guess it was a combination, but the music definitely had a role. So, I grew up with those great gigs going on from when I was a young kid. My first gig, I was 6 years old. That was Thin Lizzy and U2 in '81.
Oh my God.
which was an amazing gig. And Dad was a real pioneer to do it at what was quite a difficult time for Ireland. And he decided to invite everyone over to his front garden to forget about the troubles. So that kind of maverick moment set us on the path of doing the gigs. But the whiskey came out of it because in around 2009, which is when we started working on the project, live music was under threat. Thankfully now it's all the rage again, and let's hope we get beyond these strange times, be able to go to gigs again. But 2009, it kind of was looking a little dicey. Everyone's got smartphones, downloading, and we didn't know whether live gigs had a future. So we recognized the need to diversify. I'm very passionate. I loved my Irish whiskey anyway. But as I mentioned, we had a few things that also made sense. Firstly, whiskey and music go well together.
Absolutely.
So we had an opportunity to sell to 80,000 fans coming to the gigs. But we had the land, we were growing this beautiful barley, and there were distilleries in the Boyne Valley, which is where we are historically. So it made sense. We also have an amazing water supply, the River Boyne, which has a little bit of minerality, but not too much, perfect for making water. And then the beautiful collections of buildings that I'm sitting in right now, which date from the 1750s. And these were the stable yards and farmyard buildings, grain stores that basically serviced the castle and fell out into disuse. And putting a whiskey distillery in these beautiful buildings, although people thought I was crazy to do it because of all the planning and heritage implications, but actually I've always thought of buildings as living things. And ultimately we're doing what is linked to the farm. We're growing stuff on the farm, adding value, employing local people, and producing some great whiskey. So all of that came together. But I think it wouldn't have happened without Slane being put on the map through the concerts, for sure.
Wow, that's pretty amazing when you think about where Irish whiskey has gone. Now, Irish whiskey is arguably probably the fastest growing whiskey segment in the world the last couple of years.
Yep.
Tell me about Slane Village and like you said, all that heritage they had. How has that changed over the years, and how is the introduction of a distillery kind of help that I guess the village itself?
Yeah, well, I'm very lucky. You know, it's my home, and we have a very important symbiotic relationship, I guess, with the village. Now, there's a long tradition in Irish whiskey brands of either naming after the place or sometimes the family, you know, behind it. Same would apply in Scotland. We deliberately decided to call it Slane because we feel that it's about more than just us as a family, the Conynghams, or indeed Slane Castle. That, you know, we're there to support the village, and hopefully vice versa. It's a beautiful village, got 4 pubs, one traffic light, and I guess they've had an unusual journey with us through the gigs, because you have 80,000 people coming into a village of only 1,200 people. It's a big change.
Yeah.
I think what the distillery has done is, we're employing locals, but also it's bringing tourism in. You know, Irish whiskey tourism is growing really fast. You look at what the amazing stuff that's happened with the Kentucky Bourbon Trail. I mean, there's some inspiration. And I think we've got the Irish Whiskey 360, which is tying all of the Irish distilleries together now. So I think we're going to make a big contribution towards local tourism, and that means these people need places to eat and stay, and they can explore. So I hope it's bringing some much needed, I guess, funds and interest in the place beyond the concerts. You know, we're only 30 minutes north of Dublin. So in the Boyne Valley, we've got these amazing tombs just up the road here, passage tombs, which are older than the Egyptian pyramids. So it's the birth of civilization in Ireland. So loads to explore in the Boyne Valley.
Well, yeah, I'm kind of a history nerd when it comes to whiskey and just overall and what goes into it. So I think I might have to take a visit there one day.
Yeah, well, you'd be welcome. Love to show you around.
I'm actually a drummer. I've been drumming for over 20 something years. So
nice.
Yeah, so whiskey and music definitely go well together for me. Sometimes when I'm playing or rehearsing down here in my basement, I will actually pour a little bit of a whiskey just to have on the side as I'm playing, which is always a fun time.
Yeah, brilliant.
Yeah, absolutely. So Slane Village. So you mentioned the Irish Whiskey 360. Is that Ireland's version of like a Kentucky Bourbon Trail?
Yes, sir. Yeah, it is. Absolutely. So it's just kind of getting going now. So we've gone from 2 distilleries, just 2 in Ireland, to just over 30 now, basically pretty much in a decade. So the industry's booming. Irish whiskey, you mentioned, is enjoying some great growth, and I think that's because it's a very approachable, easy to drink category, although there's lots of depth within it. And yeah, Ireland is already a lovely place to visit, and you know, who doesn't love a good Irish pub? So if you actually come to Ireland and enjoy some of the pubs in our rural locations, like these distilleries like Slane, many of them are in rural locations, so it gives you a great chance to explore the country and take in some great whiskey at the time. So yeah, Irish Whiskey 360 is exactly that. And you've got to bear in mind, Ireland's a small country. It's not too dissimilar to the size of Kentucky. So, yeah, exactly. So getting that trail all in, although it's a country trail, it's not too different size-wise.
So you mentioned the Boyne Valley earlier. How does that location help in the creation of Slane Irish whiskey? Is it, you said it has a low minerality, really makes for a nice smooth Irish whiskey. What else about that valley helps in the creation of the whiskey itself?
So the reason why there are a lot of distilleries here is because we probably have some of the best farmland in the country here. We've got lovely clay loam soils, and obviously we get plenty of rain in Ireland, though we're in the middle of a drought at the moment. Some of the best ground for basically growing that barley, and it's always been a major cereal growing reason. This is why civilization started in the Boyne Valley in Ireland, and my family's been growing barley here for a couple of 100 years, and although I haven't actually been able to show that it went into distilleries, I'm sure it did in the past, because there were distilleries to the east and west of us. There wasn't one in Slane, but there certainly was lots of distilling happening in the Boyne Valley in the 19th century. Okay. So that is one of the main reasons why they were here, is because they had access to the best raw material, and that is the barley itself. And then I've already mentioned that the water supply from the river, and we literally take our water supply straight from the river. We don't do anything to it. We do a light filtration, make sure we haven't got any twigs or sticks or anything, but it is just straight from the river. And basically it falls on the land. As it flows off the land, it's going to pick up a little bit of minerality, but if you have too much, it's going to scale up all your equipment. But you do need a little bit, because that yeast, when it comes to fermentation, it just helps to produce those better, fruitier ester notes, which ultimately leads to a more flavorful whiskey.
That's awesome. So let's talk about the whiskey. So Slane, so technically it was launched in what, 2017?
Yep, May 2017. Yeah,
May 2017. What's unique about this one to me is the triple casting that's used. So you guys do a virgin oak, then you do a seasoned oak, which is a semi-used cask, and then you use an Oloroso sherry cask as well to mature the whiskey. Now, yeah, is this what led you to wanting to create this type of profile for an Irish whiskey?
So firstly, if we only so we launched in 2017, and we only started building the distillery in 2016. So what we actually did is we sourced liquid from other distilleries. We've always been very honest about that. And it was malt whiskey and grain whiskey all in cask, and that would be American cask, which is what a lot of Irish and Scotch has matured in. We could have just blended that and put it out to market, but we decided no, we would do a secondary extended maturation. So that was another full 2 years, and that's when we split the inventory between 3 different barrels at the same time. And what's unusual is other multi-cask whiskies might take the same batch of whiskey and run it through sequentially. We did it simultaneously and then blend them together. And ultimately what that means is you've got more control to dial up or dial down the flavor impacts of each barrel. So being part of Brown-Forman now, we had access to barrels straight out of the cooperage. So that was an obvious place to start. So we used a virgin American white oak barrel, heavily toasted medium char for our first barrel. And the great thing about that is when you cook the wood rather than burn it, i.e. toast rather than char, yep, what happens is it brings out way more vanillins, and that becomes vanilla. So I got a little glass of Slane here in front of me, and
yeah, I just poured some here. And
there you go.
When you said vanillins, that was actually the first thing that jumped out of the glass. Yeah, was vanilla, and you definitely pick up some of that fruit from the Oloroso sherry.
You do, definitely. And behind the vanilla and those dried fruit notes you're talking about, your raisins, your sultanas, there's a lovely heavy sweet note. Like other Irish blends are generally pretty sweet, but they might be a bit more on the clear honey side of things. We wanted to go a bit deeper, a bit richer. And that actually comes from the second barrel, which we call seasoned. It's another American barrel. And obviously through Brown-Forman, we've got access to some cracking barrels. And in this case, it's primarily a Tennessee whiskey barrel. And that is going to deepen the sweet note. So you're moving out of clear honey territory and you're getting more into a lovely brown sugar, like Demerara sugar note. So you got vanilla. So it's got a really quite heavy nose, Slane, and a lovely kind of sweet body.
This doesn't, to me, this didn't have. So I did a little bit of, homework last night before the live. I poured a glass of this next to a few other popular 80 proof whiskeys, 80 proof Irish whiskeys. And this one actually came off more as, like you said, it had a little bit more depth to it. I think the casking, the mixes of the 3 different casks definitely helps. Had a little bit more depth to the nose to it. And it also, like you said, it just provided a little bit more on the palate when it came to overall flavor, rather than, like you said, just the kind of a sweet honey, vanilla, butter, fresh butter, like maybe like a light toast flavor that you would normally get in a Irish whiskey.
Yeah, we wanted to kind of deepen it. So you've already spoken about the heavier brown sugar. There's a lovely, almost like a ripe banana nose in there as well, and that's coming from that Tennessee cask. It's almost like, and you're putting those 2 things together, it's like almost like a banana Foster note. It's and it's, this is why it's a great whiskey to drink, but a fun one to cook with as well. It's just got a lot of presence. Our ambition was to try and deliver a full flavored whiskey at an affordable price, and that was really kind of where we came from. But it's all about flavor forward whiskey. That's what we wanted to do.
Yeah, Donald Rance says so. Donald Rance is a good friend of the show, and he is an Irish whiskey. I call him the Irish whiskey Yoda. He knows a lot.
Love that.
He says butterscotch and fruity taffy for me, which I would definitely agree with a little bit.
So you're gonna have to tell me what taffy is, because I'm not familiar with that. What is taffy?
So taffy is kind of like just basically sweet sugar, but it's like this kind of a stretchy type of candy.
Okay, so it's like a chewy toffee.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
but it's usually a little bit flatter, and they flavor it with a bunch of different things, so you can.
Okay, nice.
Yeah, so it's got a little bit of like a banana taffy note to it, I think, from those tea casks.
Oh, well, you're spot on there, Donald. Absolutely, that kind of chewy toffee thing is definitely there. So that's nice to hear. So you got the ripe banana, you got the butterscotch, and then the sherry is probably the biggest of the biggest beast out of the three of them. It delivers the dried fruit that you mentioned earlier there, Jason, like this kind of raisin, sultana note, maybe even a little bit of date going on. And then it's about the finish as well, right? This is where the lovely aromatic brown spices come in. Like it's a long, spicy. You get a little bit of woodiness from the virgin, but hopefully not overpowering. Just a little bit of woodiness.
Not at all. There's a slight peppery note, and I get a touch of cinnamon on the very, very end.
Yeah, cinnamon's in there. I'd say almost like a nutmeg or an allspice, like just right on the finish. I really wanted it to have a long, lingering finish. This was really important, and I hope we did the best job we could, but staying out of the market for that 2 years, I think it was worth it, because that triple casking has really transformed the whiskey.
Yeah, and like I said, I think for an 80 proof Irish, this has much more flavor than you would expect from when you look at some of the other ones across, like Tullamore Dew or even Jameson. Those, obviously there's some special castings there that they use, but
sure, just
a straight up profile, just do regular Irish whiskey. Nothing added, no fancy cask maturation. This definitely stood up a little bit above to me with the like I said, when you combine those caskings, it's a really nice flavor profile. And I will say that my girlfriend who's not a whiskey fan, I actually poured a little bit of this for her, and she really liked it. So
nice.
So Slane has become maybe possibly her new favorite whiskey.
Well, that's awesome to hear. It's very popular actually with kind of both male, female drinkers. It seems to jump a good gap there. I think Irish as a category is a really nice, accessible. If someone's starting on their whiskey journey, I think Irish is a good place to start, because it's got that nice, smooth sweetness. But hopefully, as with Slane, it just shows that there's also a bit more to it. You can have a lot of body, but not in any way be intimidating.
And it doesn't feel on the palate like it's 80 proof. It feels a little bit thicker, a little bit more viscous.
Yes, that viscosity. Yeah, I mean that's getting back to the taffy, was it?
Yeah,
like
exactly.
that lovely viscosity on the palate.
Viscosity, yeah.
Actually,
so tell us about. So I've always been fascinated. So you had Brown-Forman. You decided to partner with them to kind of give that. And there's definitely is a Brown-Forman DNA in this glass a little bit when you talk about the banana, from the Tennessee cask, and that vanilla coming from the old Forester casks. But what's the process like to select Oloroso sherry barrels? I've always been fascinated by sherry barrels are not cheap. So when you
say that again.
Yeah. So when you go select them, you want to select the best barrel. So when you decided that you wanted to do a third casking with Oloroso, what's that process like in going to hunt out the cask you want?
Well, firstly, I had a bit of convincing to do because Brown-Forman is an American whiskey company. They now own 3 fantastic Scotch brands, but they didn't at the time when I was trying to persuade them. And you've rightly pointed out the sherry barrels are expensive, and the more obvious choice would have been to delve into some other Brown-Forman barrels. But we decided to go for the sherry because It's the classic barrel. So before American whiskey barrels became available, you had, we're getting a bit of echo there, Jason, we all right?
Oh, no, I'm fine. Yep.
That was good, sorry. So before the American whiskey barrels became available to Scotch and Irish distillers, back in the 19th century, they would have used what was coming into the country, and that was largely fortified wine, because they couldn't figure out how to get wine from Europe to England and Ireland without it fouling. So that's where port and sherry, increasing the alcohol content to help it make its journey. So these barrels were arriving in and then being emptied, and people started putting whiskey in them. So there's a long tradition of using sherry casks in Irish. And my granddad, who got me into this drinking Irish in the first place, loved his Irish whiskeys that had a sherry cask influence. So I said to Brown-Forman, look, I want to look at sherry. And we actually took some old malt whiskey, Irish malt, and added a few drops of Oloroso. This is a fun thing to do at home. If you've got any sherry in your drinks cabinet, take a whiskey and put a few drops of sherry in it and see how it tastes before and after, and it completely transforms the liquid. So on the basis of doing that little trick, we then went out to Jerez, which is in Spain, which is where sherry is made. We went to a few different bodegas, but we were drawn, in this case, to the Paez family. And the reason for that is, like Brown-Forman, they are not only a sherry producer, they actually make their own barrels. So they have their own cooperage. They harvest the timber sustainably in France and in Spain. And their barrels are very expensive to buy, but they're worth it because they're works of art. So they're seasoned with Oloroso sherry for a full 2 years before we get our hands on them. And then we ship them over to Ireland. A few litres of sherry are going to be left in there, because otherwise they're going to dry out on their journey. And we don't waste anything in Slane. So take the bung out, smell that cask. Normally smells divine, by the way.
Can imagine.
And then, yeah, so we don't waste that liquid. We're going to pour our whiskey in on top, and that liquid is going to mix with the whiskey plus what's soaked into the wood, and then the impact of the wood itself. And that's where all of this lovely dried fruit, bit of color and everything comes in. But it is definitely the biggest out of the three of them. And I'd kind of describe it as the backbone of the blend. It gives it that lovely depth of flavor and character.
Yeah, you could definitely taste the notes on there, coming from that sherry cask. Like you said, I think my favorite note in this particular whiskey is that raisin date note that you had mentioned. And I think that's what gives it that extra layer of flavor here. Are there rules within Irish whiskey that allows or disallows using different caskings, or is it more about the grain or the mash bill, I should say, in creation of it?
So it's a combination of both. One kind of difference between Irish and Scotch. So we have something called the Irish Whiskey Technical File. If anybody really wants to delve into the geeky side of it, if you go,
that's me.
Yeah, so you can Google the Irish Whiskey Technical File. It's a long document, and that will actually tell you about all of the different types of Irish whiskey, plus what's allowed from a mash bill perspective, what's allowed from maturation, distillation. It's a great read, but obviously we can't delve into that now. But one of the key things is, if you look at Scotch, for example, they have to use oak. That is not actually specified in Ireland. Now, we mainly do use oak, but you could technically use another wood. It does need to be 3 years, minimum of 3 years.
Okay.
In terms of the mash bills, so Slane is a blend of malt whiskey and grain whiskey. So the malt has to be from 100% malted barley. And then the grain whiskey, and made in pot stills. The grain whiskey component is made from malted barley, generally, and a mixture of other cereals. And that's made in column still. So much faster distillation, continuous process, taken to a much higher proof, less congeners. So generally kind of less character, but a great blank canvas when you put it to wood. And that's why it's used a lot for blending.
All right. So yeah. So you mentioned that your Irish whiskey is basically, you have 3 separate whiskeys that are aged in those 3 separate barrels, and then they're blended, correct?
Yes. So the blending process is a real art to this. And Garode Cattle, who's our head distiller here, and the team, I'd be on the blending panel as well. But that's very important, and it's never as simple as a third. There's a lot more that goes into it than that. And we also blend slightly different proportions of malt and grain in each of the 3 barrels, and then we blend them together at the end. So it's quite a complex process, but if you want to get the most flavor out of each of those barrels, that's what you need to do.
Yeah, I'm sure it can be a little bit tedious sometimes too, because each of your whiskeys are going to age a little differently. So when you start blending them together to get that consistency, you guys must be tasting different blends constantly to get that consistency.
Yes, it's a terrible job, but someone's got to do it.
It's a terrible job. That's what I was gonna say. I don't know if my sarcastic tone came out. You guys must be tasting stuff constantly. It's a terrible, terrible thing.
It is, but I love it. I'm very lucky to be in this industry, and tasting is a very important component of it. And tasting new make is always a fun thing as well. Before it starts its life in the cask, that's always a wonderful experience.
Well, listen, tasting new make Irish whiskey on the grounds of a castle is not a bad way to live your days, buddy.
No, I got no complaints.
So tell us about the process of creating it before it even goes to before it even enters the casks. You were sourcing a little bit in the beginning, but now, yeah. So talk about the grain, the barley, what kinds of stills you're using. Are you using pot stills? Is there a combination of column stills? Since 2017, how is your setup evolved, and what is it now?
So it's quite a complex distillery in that if you go across to Scotland, you're generally going to go to a malt distillery, which will just make one type of whiskey, single malt, or you'll go to a grain distillery, which is generally a massive facility making large amounts of grain whiskey using column stills. So here in Slane, we actually make 3 very distinct different types of Irish whiskey. So the first type is a malt whiskey. So it's triple distilled in pot stills, using 100% malted Irish barley, okay. Some of which we're growing on our own land right around the distillery.
That's awesome.
And then the second one then is the grain whiskey, which can potentially end up in the blend, or it could be a standalone single grain. And what's unusual about that is we're the only distillery in Ireland using an all barley mash bill for that. So we use a combination of malted barley and unmalted barley. Now, unmalted barley is lovely because what it does is it introduces a kind of creamier mouthfeel and a natural kind of spicy note, particularly as the whiskey matures. But it is quite tough to process. Like physically, raw barley is pretty tough stuff. Like you bite on that and might need to go see the dentist. Whereas if you bite into malt, it's lovely and crunchy, like a biscuity flavors. We use unmalted barley, and we run that through the column stills, and that gives us a very unique grain spirit, which I think is going to make a cracking single grain whiskey for future release. And then the last type of whiskey we make is unique to Ireland. It's called pot still whiskey. And pot still whiskey is, again, you can look at the Irish whiskey technical file, but it's distilled in pot stills. But the difference is you're not using just malted barley, you're using unmalted barley in the mash bill. And again, what it leads to is, we were talking about those dried fruit characters earlier. Yep. As pot still whiskey matures, it really dives deep into that fruitcake territory. And it's only made in Ireland, and it emerged because of malt taxes that were introduced back in the 1750s. And effectively, Irish whiskey was the #1 spirit in the world back then. And the government at the day was a little peeved because this whiskey was flying out all over the world, but they weren't making that much money on the industry. So what they decided to do was, rather than taxing the whiskey, they would tax the inputs. They introduced a malt tax. Now, the Irish said, well, geez, we don't want to pay all that tax. So what happens if we start introducing unmalted barley into the mash bill? Will it work? They didn't really understand at the time why it worked. It's to do with the enzymes, obviously, that come about through germination. But they found that not only did it work, but it produced this different spirit, which is more presence, more body, creamier mouthfeel, lovely spice notes. And so pot still whiskey became huge, and then nearly died out with the collapse of Irish whiskey. And now it's enjoying real resurgence. So over the coming decade, you're going to see more and more ultra premium pot still whiskeys, including those from Slane, coming onto the market. And it's I would encourage your viewers, if you haven't tried any pot still whiskey, to go out and try some. It's a very different animal to single malt.
Yeah, pot still, when it comes to, so one of my other favorite brands is Teeling, who opened opened a great distillery now in Dublin. They've been releasing a lot of different expressions, including a pot still, including single grain. Then they have their different casking, their single malt. So I think you could have a chance now here in the U.S. to taste through a different type of all the different types of Irish whiskey that there are, and there is definitely a difference between all the different types. So with all of that type of all those choices now out there, I think Irish whiskey can only really just get more interesting for most people here in the U.S.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, 10 years ago in the US, you'd be hard pressed to find an Irish whiskey section in a store, right? And now you've got all of this lovely choice going on. And Slane will be playing in that choice. Like, we will have our pot still and our single grain, but the core offering, our blend, is here to stay. But yeah, we look forward to participating in that expansion of the category. And there's a whole host of different flavor profiles. A lot of innovation happening in Irish whiskey, both on how the spirit's produced, the mash bill, and ultimately in wood as well. And we're going to make sure we keep that innovation. Triple casking, as I say, there was certainly a cost to doing it, but I think it was well worth it. So we'll keep that flavor forward style. We'll run through all of our whiskeys for sure.
Yeah, I will say I would love to taste this at a higher proof and a little bit more of a maybe non-chill filtered even as well, like as maybe like a special release. I mean, this stuff must be just incredible coming off, coming right out of the cask.
It is, yeah. I mean, I've obviously been lucky enough to taste all of those, and I've got some lots of interesting samples here behind me, but that's a little unfair to delve into those. But what always surprises me is quite how much character this spirit has when it comes off white and clear straight off the still. Mm-hmm. It's our pot still in particular, so fruity, and I'm talking like tropical, almost pineapple, peachy tones, and then it hits the wood, and there's this big kind of battle that goes on, and it becomes very tanniny, and you always get nervous for the last while, and then it just starts to come out the other side, But before it goes into the barrel, the liquid is already. I'm really impressed. The team have done a cracking job. So I hope over the next decade or so, we're going to have some really exciting whiskeys coming out of Slane.
Yeah, higher age pot still whiskey when it's a little bit higher in age is some of my favorite stuff that I've ever tasted. Because like you said, you get a ton of these tropical notes, the pineapples, but also with that pot still, there's a little bit of bite to it on the end. So you get a really nice mix of sweet and spice, plus that unique DNA that Irish whiskey has, that brown butter and the toast and the butterscotch and all those great flavors that intermingle together. So
yeah, and so creamy as well, like really creamy,
That's the other part of it. Pot stills give you such a creaminess to the whiskey, which is, I love when bourbon producers, there's some bourbon producers here that are using pot stills now, or what they're doing is they'll source some some distillate, and they'll run it through a pot still to give it a little bit more of a creaminess to it. And there's definitely a big difference there. So I'm a big fan of pot stills myself.
Yeah, I mean, look at Woodford, for example, cracking bourbon,
Absolutely, yeah. Woodford double oaked, I think, is very underrated for how creamy it is. A lot of people say how sweet it is, and yes, that's true. But if you compare the mouthfeel of Woodford double oak to a lot of the other stuff out there, it's definitely up a little bit of a level there.
Yeah, and now, of course, being part of Brown-Forman, we have access to all kinds of lovely barrels to play with.
Yes, you do.
Whiskey like that. So yeah,
that's actually that's another thing I wanted to mention, guys. I'm hoping I was just talking earlier with Brown-Forman, and we're hoping to maybe get someone from the cooperage on the channel soon. So keep an eye out for that, to talk all geeky things barrels. That'll be a lot of fun. So is production up and running with you guys? Are you using your own distillate, or are you still sourcing and blending some of your own?
No, we're fully up and running, even in these challenging times. So no, we're absolutely making, and we've made all three types now for a little while. So that's all sitting in the warehouses, maturing. We started distilling in around October 2017. So legally, that'll hit whiskey status this year. But we'd be very careful not to release anything until we genuinely feel it's ready. So we're not going to release it just because we hit the date. We need the flavor to be right and the balance to be right. So we will start blending in as and when we're ready. We're not going to chop change from third-party source liquid into our own, because the inventory is all different ages, and this is one of the ways that you can manage consistency, because Slane is a blend of malt and grain whiskies, and ultimately in 3 different barrels, and there are different ages in there. So gradually we will phase in. So it's gonna actually take probably the best part of close to a decade to really merge everything out. But our standalone whiskey made exclusively at Slane, we're probably still a couple of years away from that. The single grain might end up being the first, but it'll all, just because that tends to mature a little quicker than malt whiskey, and then pot still probably needs the longest to really get those flavor notes coming out right. Because if you launch it too early, it can be pretty hot, and it just, the real character doesn't shine through. So yeah, lots to look forward to anyway.
Yeah, I'll definitely be first in line for a Slane single grain. That'll be pretty amazing.
Yeah. Well, weirdly, our single grain is going to be made from a single grain as well, because single grain just means from a single distillery and made in column stills. It doesn't actually refer to the mash bill.
Okay.
So our single grain will be a single grain, but made from a single grain being barley. So it's kind of, I don't even know what we're going to call it. It'd be like a double single.
I'm sure you'll come up with a fancy name for that one. So one of the interesting trends that I've seen with Irish whiskey is not just the popularity of the segment that we talked about a little bit, but Irish whiskey is being used in cocktails, and that's even happening here in the United States. What creativity have you seen? You mentioned there's a few small pubs near you, but are partnering with bartenders, local pubs out in and around Ireland, is that also part of the marketing aspect of Slane and getting it out to the population, as far as just kind of gaining that traction? I've had a couple of really good cocktails recently using Irish whiskey, and I think it's kind of I don't know if it's a new thing, but I think people are trying to include Irish whiskey in more creative cocktails more and more lately.
Yeah, Irish whiskey has a very long history with cocktails. You've got to remember, a lot of the cocktails emerged during Prohibition years, when everyone was trying to hide the booze, and Irish whiskey was the #1 spirit in the world back then. So there's some very old Irish whiskey cocktails. You look in publications like the Savoy Cocktail Book, stuff like that. But you take your classic kind of big boozy drinks. Irish whiskey can work very well. Slane is like full flavored, and we designed it to be that way because we didn't want it to get lost in a cocktail. So if you're light, then you're gonna. It's hard to keep track of it, but Slane works in the cocktail because there's lots of rich flavors like the banana, the brown sugar to bounce off. But also, if you throw other ingredients, including ice at it, it's going to hold up. Yep. So I love my kind of strong. I'm fan of a drink like a Boulevardier or a Tipperary, like classic old school boozy cocktails.
Nice.
But I've also, we spoke about ripe banana notes. I've had daiquiris made with Slane, which are awesome. I've had tiki drinks. So I think the fact that Irish whiskey is very approachable and versatile means that it can work in a whole range of different drinks. Another one of my favorite, we call it the River Boyne Fizz, which is super easy to make at home. It's more of a kind of a long drink, almost a highball. You just equal parts lemon juice, and honey. Ideally, if you can get nice local honey, support your Urban Bee project, and combine those together, and lots of ice, and top it up with tonic. Really easy to make, and you can garnish it with a bit of rosemary, and smack it before you put it in. It's a lovely, summery, light, refreshing drink. So I think Irish whiskey is making its way into more cocktail lists, and rightfully so, because there's plenty of flavor there to play with.
Yeah, I think from a standpoint of, from drinkers trying to get into Irish whiskey, cocktails is definitely, a big helper in that aspect. If someone asks you, we have a question here, why Irish when they're Scotch? What's the big difference you think from Scotch and an Irish whiskey standpoint that you would drive people more towards Irish whiskey?
Well, I think firstly, there's a lot of innovation going on in Irish. You've got 30 new distilleries in the last decade, masses of different flavors and styles to explore. Scotland has its regionality. You've got from Islay to Speyside, all the rest. I think what Ireland brings is generally a very approachable, non-intimidating, I think, perhaps a little more informal, if that makes sense, a bit more playful. But flavor is very much part of our DNA as a category. And I think you're seeing a lot of innovation in wood, as I said earlier, in mash bills. This is why with Slane, we dived into that triple cask process, because what we wanted to deliver, it's all about flavor. So what I would say, if you're an avid Scotch drinker, give the Irish a go, because I think you'll be pleasantly surprised about the complexity that's in there, but also the kind of playfulness. And we spoke about cocktails. You can have a lot of fun with Irish, and obviously Slane in particular. Yeah.
So how have you been influenced by other Irish whiskey creators that kind of has helped you through your journey? I mean, your family has a long lineage, and obviously your stuff when it comes to history and what Irish whiskey has been through. When you look in the past, how has that influenced your present and your future?
So our approach to the whole distillery design. So I believe it's very important to acknowledge and respect tradition. So our distillery, on the one hand, is very traditional. We've got 3 hand-beaten copper pot stills from one of the top 2 makers in Scotland. Unfortunately, those skills don't exist in Ireland at the moment. We went with timber washbacks or fermentation tanks rather than stainless steel, which is a more natural way of making whiskey, more traditional, because the microbes that will survive in the cracks between the wood and in the fibers themselves will actually lend flavor notes to the whiskey making. So things like that are super traditional, but we brought in a lot of innovation in terms of process, particularly from a sustainability standpoint, which doesn't so much affect flavor, but it's still an important part of our ethos, in that our ambition is to become a zero waste facility. We've actually put in an anaerobic digester on site that's going to take the waste products from the stills, create biogas, which we can then burn to help heat the stills. That's going to reduce our carbon emissions by about 30%. But in terms of flavor, I think we wanted to bring in innovation and be flavorful. So yes, we will stick to the rules, the Irish Whiskey Technical File rules, but we want to bring in innovation. And the reason for doing that is all about delivering better flavor and richer flavor. So you will not see anything light come out of Slane, light or fluffy. We're into big, powerful, full flavored whiskeys.
Yeah, so that's, and I think between this and what you talked about coming in the future, I think there's a lot to be excited for. What's a couple of fun questions here, and I do want to give the audience that's watching a chance to ask you some questions.
Yeah, absolutely.
So you guys can start running your questions in, but before we get into that, what's your favorite concert you ever saw at Slane Castle?
So different ones for different reasons, but and I've got many stories, but I'll give you one's just come to mind now.
Okay.
I think probably my first time when I realized how powerful music could be with a crowd, I was probably 8 or 9 years old, and we had Queen playing with Freddie Mercury, and Brian May, the guitarist, did this amazing long solo. Freddie came off stage for a costume change or whatever else he was getting up to.
That's pretty good.
And the whole crowd, 80,000, it was actually a bigger crowd. It was well over, we don't exactly know, but call it 80, 90,000 people were listening to Brian May's solo. And he played the last note. And there's this wonderful moment when the crowd is about to erupt into applause, but they haven't quite yet because they're letting him finish. And in that precise moment, Freddie Mercury bursts out and just let rip with this unbelievable note, and the crowd just went nuts. I've actually got goosebumps thinking about that, because that's when I realized how powerful music was. So that's, I guess, probably up there with one of my top moments.
Wow, yeah. If that sticks out to you, then that's got to be it. But I mean, the fact you got to see Queen, Freddie Mercury, that's. I wish I had been enough into Queen in my younger days to go seek out and see them before. Obviously, we lost Freddie Mercury, unfortunately.
Yeah.
But
yeah, one of the best frontman ever. Amazing.
Yeah, and one of the best and most pure voices that you'll ever hear.
Yeah.
What's the oldest Irish whiskey you've ever tasted?
I've been lucky enough to taste some pretty old stuff that wouldn't have been put into a bottle, so it's not a brand or anything. But I've tasted some grain whiskey that's over 40 years old.
Wow.
Which was incredibly complex. I mean, fantastic stuff. I have tasted some good old malt. Probably the oldest one, kind of known brand one that I would have tasted might be the Napogue 1951. I've been lucky enough to taste that. It's beautiful whiskey. So as a bottle product, I'd probably list that one. It's been my top one.
God, a 40-year-old single grain with that's insane.
Yeah, it was pretty good.
All right, let's get some questions here. We have, I think Donald Rance, our Irish whiskey Yoda, as I called him, had a question earlier. Let me pull that up. Here we go. For Alex, what's the mash bill of their pot still? Is it a 50-50 malted, unmalted, or are they using a different percentage along with the up to 5% of other cereal?
So we're not doing the 5% of other cereal at the moment. We could do it. We wouldn't be able to grind it on site. We'd probably have to put it into the mash or lager tun as grist, and certainly something we've thought about. In terms of our ratio, we're talking 60% malted, 40% unmalted, and then the grain whiskey, which is also a combination of the two, we kind of flip it around. So that's got a much higher proportion of unmalted barley, which is actually making it a really interesting new make.
Whiskey Quest, this is Antonio, says, I wanted to know, do they have plans for possibly an Irish peated whiskey?
No, it's a good question, because there is, peated Irish whiskey out there. It's not something that we've considered here. As my own personal preference, I'm not, I guess it's what I grew up with. I'm not massively into the peated side of things myself, but I don't want to let that skew things. Barley, because I grow it myself, I'm very attached to the cereal. What I will say is I think there's other ways, without revealing too much, there's other things that you can do that might be interesting in terms of innovation. So peating is just one way of drying the whiskey. There's drying the malt. There's lots of other ways of doing that, and I think that's something we'd like to experiment with in the future. But no plans for peat.
Whiskey Jason, I think we kind of answered this. How much influence does Brown Forman have on the production of Slane? A good amount, I would say, based on the caskings, correct?
They do. I mean, if you're talking about the actual whiskey production here on site, we have it. It's very much Garrod Cahill is our head distiller. So it's largely an Irish team, but obviously we do have amazing technical support from a company, Brown Forman, that makes amazing whiskey and has done since 1870. Their research and development division, their space alone is huge. So we've got lots of technical expertise that we can get support from, but it's very much an Irish-led operation on the ground.
So this is Matt from Whiskey Crusaders. I'm not sure if you guys have other products that are already available in Ireland, but are more Slane. So once we get into more of these maybe experimental or the single grains, will those be coming to the US, rather quickly, or will they kind of stay in Ireland, to kind of see how those launch at first?
So we'll have a couple of things that we'll just do at the distillery, as many places do, because it gives you a chance to kind of play around on a small scale. Yep. But there will be some variations coming down the track, but they're a little bit away. So yeah, people can definitely look for more coming from Slane. It's going to take a little while for our standalone products, made exclusively of Slane, because they just need more time in the wood. But we are playing with some ideas. So over the next couple of years, there will definitely be more coming to the US for sure.
Let's see. Thought I saw another one come in here. Oh, here we go. Alex, any other? This is a question I wanted to ask. Any other types of finishing cask you would like to experiment besides the Oloroso?
Yeah, absolutely. There is for sure. I think the world is the world's your oyster there in terms of not just looking at whiskey, but other types of spirit or fortified wines. So cask innovation will continue to be important for Slane. There's one funny story actually. So when my dad was trying to keep the castle going, he took the old kitchens many years ago and stripped them out and opened a nightclub, which is it's not working at the moment, but we do have a nightclub in the basement of the castle. And the reason I tell this is that on the original plans from the 1780s, there was a room attached to the old kitchens, which is called the Madeira Room, because the Conyngham at the time was an archaeologist and did a lot of stuff in the Iberian Peninsula and picked up a thirst for Madeira. And what's funny is the Madeira Room is now the DJ booth for the nightclub. So we might have to look at a bit of Madeira.
A Madeira, okay, yeah, that would be. I think Madeira actually gives it a very nice kind of a vegetal type of flavor profile that goes along with those sweet flavors. I do like Madeira. There are also some sweet flavors that adds in too, but every Madeira whiskey I've had, there's been almost like a fresh garden type vibe to it, which I enjoy.
Yeah, I get that too. But no, absolutely, we're not just going to stick to those Brown-Forman barrels, although there's lots of things within Brown-Forman that we could look at. But we'll certainly, as we did with the sherry, we'll cast the net wider.
So we have Ed from the Rock Up Review. He says, what about a seaweed charred barrel or something similar that seems to be a new trend? Is that anything that you've heard about or have experienced?
Not something I've tried myself, but I love the idea. So it's a bit like smoking. When you're basically smoking the barley with peat, you could potentially use some other things. But in terms of charring barrels, most of them are charred just using gas. But I don't see why you couldn't use other things. Our Oloroso sherry casks actually, they'll take the shavings off the barrels and they burn those, and that's how they char the barrels. So there's lots of different ways. So we got some cracking seaweed in Ireland. I know that we're an island, so I like the idea. It's not something I've tasted myself, but yeah. thanks for giving me a few ideas there.
There you go. Steve A, he's already putting in his order. I'd love a Madeira cask pot still, 48% ABV or so.
Nice. All right. Very specific. I love the ABV. Yeah, I like it.
Let's see here. I think there was one more question I saw. Here we go. Yeah. What type of barley do you grow and how many acres do you have currently?
So we have 1,500 acres and we work on a crop rotation basis. So barley traditionally, to be honest, would have been grown using, a lot of artificial fertilizers. We're now trying to be a bit kinder to the soil. So we grow crops in rotation with things like beans and other legumes that will put nitrogen back into the soil, and we plant new hedgerows every year, and we're doing agroforestry, trees in the field to try and boost biodiversity. But I would never grow, certainly we grow winter barley and spring barley. So the winter barley can be used for the pot still, the unmalted component for the pot still, and the grain whiskey. Would typically grow two different varieties, basically to spread the risk in case one becomes vulnerable to disease or drought or etc. Same on the malting side. Those are the spring barley varieties. The beauty of growing both spring and winter is it extends your harvesting season. So you'll be harvesting your winter varieties in kind of July, and then your spring varieties, which are planted obviously in the spring and then harvested in late July, early August. So right now in the ground, we've got two of the varieties. I know on the winter barley, we've got a variety called Cassia, in particular, and then we've got a new one we're trialing this year on the malting side called Splendor, which is a modern hybrid. One of the things I would like to do in the future is getting into growing some of those heritage grains as well, heritage older varieties of barley, which may not give us the yield that I would like as a farmer, but could potentially produce some really interesting flavor notes. They also have a potential benefit for biodiversity because they're longer strawed, and there are things that like to live in that straw that can't really work in the modern varieties. So lots of innovation to come there, but yeah, we grow a whole different, and we're very lucky to have, we're the only Irish distillery that would have access to that kind of land bank to grow its own barley.
Let me see. What is? I think what I want to. So we're coming up here on Father's Day here in.
Yes.
Yeah, you guys celebrate Father's
Yeah,
Day.
yeah, yeah, absolutely. Yep. And I'm a dad myself, so
Yeah, so
I get a
you're a
lot.
dad.
I get a lie in that day, hopefully.
Just sit, in front of that castle with your tiki drink, and that'll be a great Father's Day with your.
That would be pretty good, yeah.
Your kids, yeah. What is so when we look into the future of Slane, we've talked about some of the things you're coming down the pipeline. But as Slane continues to grow, your stuff continues to age. What do you see as, I guess, in 10 years? And did you, as we talk about Father's Day, did your dad really recognize like where this was going at first, or is he kind of all in with you, or how's that relationship?
Yeah, I'm lucky enough. Myself and Dad are not that far apart in age. He had me when he was pretty young.
Okay.
And we've very much worked together on this. We founded this together. It was his idea to start the Whisky project, and we've had a lot of fun doing it. I guess he's taught me a couple of valuable lessons. Firstly, never be afraid to take a risk as long as it's calculated. And secondly, make sure you have fun doing what you're doing, no matter what it is, from a work perspective. And I'm certainly delivering, I think, on that front.
Yeah, I think it's safe to say you're having some fun, buddy.
Yeah, but no, he and I work closely together, and there was a lovely moment. My son Rory was 8 at the time, and when we filled our first barrel of single malt made exclusively from barley that we had grown ourselves, which will become a single estate malt in the future, Rory was there at the filling of that barrel. Now, legal drinking age in Ireland is 18. And so I turned to him and I said, we are going to be cracking that barrel on your 18th birthday. And you could kind of see the wheels spinning, because that's the kind of timelines you need to think about in whiskey. So, that'll be a 10-year-old single malt when on his 18th birthday. So that was a nice kind of nod to the future, and to have Dad there as well was pretty cool.
That's a really cool story, actually, and I see a special release for the Rory edition in your future for Slane.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, the birthday edition for Rory. So yeah, I think from what you're telling me here and what you guys are doing when it comes to the growth and using your own barley, being sustainable, everything you guys are putting into the product to make it higher quality. I gotta say, I mean, I'll admit, I did not know a lot about Slane until maybe about a week or so ago. I started, doing the research, and I was fascinated with the story and the family lineage. If any of you guys out there have not tried Slane, definitely give it a go. 80 proof Irish whiskey, the triple casking is a little bit more interesting, like I said, than your regular 80 proof Irish whiskey. Absolutely delicious stuff. This coffee recipe is amazing. I might end up going to make another couple of these today because it is Friday, so why not?
Yeah. Now, is that the one you took off the slaneirishwhiskey.com website?
Yeah. So yeah, you can get. Yep, I took it off the website. Cool. Yep.
Nice.
The website is right down here.
Yeah, there's some nice cocktails if anyone has a crack at making any of those at home. We got some good ones in that. Irish whiskey and coffee is a very old combination. The Irish coffee is one of the classic, and it is a cocktail. But there's also other things you can do with coffee. We're getting into summer now, so like Slane and cold brew is cracking, or an iced Irish coffee as well. So you can have fun playing with that. But yeah, there's some good recipes there to delve into if you want to check those out.
Yeah, definitely go to the website, guys. I think I dropped the link in the chat a little bit of a while back to go check out some of the recipes in there to make some cool cocktails. Check out Slane Whiskey on Instagram. And like I said, thank you so much for coming on here and having this chat. This was very informative. I definitely learned a lot. I hope everybody out in the chat did as well. A little bit more about Irish whiskey. I'm kind of more in the bourbon world. So learning more about Irish whiskey and one of my favorite new categories that I've been getting into recently, this was extremely helpful. So I just want to say thank you for that.
No, it's been a pleasure. Well, it sounds like if you're into the bourbon, I got to do some learning there. So I think you and I need to have a follow-up barstool conversation at some stage.
Yeah, I mean, if you ever want to do another live stream and just talk bourbon and maybe do some bourbon and Irish whiskey comparisons, that could be a fun live stream.
Yeah,
maybe we'll throw in some music in there as well, which would be a blast.
Perfect. Well, it's been an absolute pleasure. Thanks a million.
All right, guys. Well, cheers. Enjoy the Friday. Enjoy the rest of your weekend. Thanks for tuning in. As I always say, it's not about the whiskey, but it's the people you share it with. Cheers. I want to say real quick to you, Alex, happy Father's Day coming up. Hope you enjoy it. Definitely looking forward in 10 years to cracking that barrel open. So
thank you very much. Well, slaunch everyone. Have a great weekend, and thanks a lot for tuning in.
Cheers, everyone. See you next time on the Mash and Drum. Take care.
All the best. Bye.